happy to speak with you. And I want to get your initial thoughts because right now, yesterday it was announced that Jeremy Corbyn would be allowed back into the UK Labour Party after he was suspended for just 3 weeks over a report on anti-Semitism in his party. What is your initial reaction to that? And what happened in the last 3 weeks that changed things for Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, nothing's really changed things for Jeremy Corbyn. Obviously, we have a new leader of the party, Keir Starmer, but Keir Starmer was in Jeremy Corbyn's cabinet. Keir Starmer was pushing and fighting for Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister of the UK. So he already has his own battle to fight in trying to convince people that, that people like Jeremy Corbyn, shouldn't be in the party at all, and they won't tolerate anti-Semitism. So that's quite a challenging one for him personally. So when Corbyn was removed from the party 3 weeks ago, that was part of Keir Starmer's sort of message to the world. We've had this legal report from the European Human Rights Commission that drafted this report. It's the first time they have ever in their history declared any party, let alone a mainstream political party, as essentially, having institutional racism within it. And they didn't say specifically that Jeremy Corbyn himself was a racist or anti-Jewish, racist, anti-Semite. But obviously, if you're leading a party that has, that is criticised in that way, then it does come back to, the finger comes back to you. But
right.
What happened was that there's a split within the Labour Party. On the one hand, you have people like Keir Starmer who claim they want to reform the party and remove all of the hard left from it, which is where the anti-Semitism is festering. But on the other hand, you have a party that's full of these people. And there is a view that amongst much of the new leadership that if they don't accommodate these people, then they'll never be able to win. And then you have the sort of Jewish Labour supporters that sort of say, well, if you do accommodate them, you'll also not be able to win. So they're torn, and that's what you've seen today in the last 24 hours. The hard left of the party, the Corbynites that are still within the party, brought him back. And today you've seen another move. Starmer has said, well, he may be back in the party, but I'm not going to give him the whip, which means he's not going to allow him to operate as a Labour member of Parliament. So he's trying to show his anti-Semitism credentials, but the problem is that the Jewish community has really lost faith. And it's an uphill battle for them, and that's good for me because I don't believe in the Labour Party anyway, being Jewish or not Jewish. I don't believe in socialism, so that's a whole separate question. But the party's torn.
Right, and it seems like you talk about Corbyn and what the report says. It doesn't specifically say that it was just Corbyn. And actually shows that there's deep-seated anti-Semitism within the party. And actually, in one portion, I believe, there's 23 instances specifically from Corbyn's office where they neglected to fully investigate claims of anti-Semitism. And we also have Corbyn himself, who has gone on the record and said things like, members of Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists are his friends. He's promoted anti-Semitic tropes and murals that went up in the UK. And actually, I've seen them myself pop up in the United States here at different protests I've covered. So what does this mean to the community as a whole? And, you're a member of the Jewish community. What does the Jewish community feel about all of this?
Well, I think they're pretty horrified by it all. They thought that they had sort of won the battle at the last election, and certainly the British electorate were on their side and had sort of said, we're not prepared to have a leader of this country that tolerates this stuff. But the party can't seem to get past it. And that is a problem. I think, many on the left claim that, Jeremy Corbyn has campaigned, he's been an anti-racist campaigner all his life. But what they fail to understand is that if you really want to understand, if you really want to understand whether somebody is perceived to be a racist, you need to discuss with the people who are fearful of that individual. And that most of the Jewish community think that, whether Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite or not, the vast, vast majority of the Jewish community in the UK believe he is. And if they believe he is, that's good enough, or it's bad enough. Whichever way you look at it, that's bad enough. If 90% of black people in America said that Trump, let's say, was a racist, then you'd have to accept it. Obviously, they don't, and many blacks have voted for Trump this time around, many more. But you have to ask the community and the people that are at the receiving end what they think to determine whether or not the racism or perceived racism exists. And if Jeremy Corbyn is convinced that he's not an anti-Semite, it's up to him to prove it. And he's done nothing to prove it. Every single whatever he says, actions speak louder than words. And all of his actions have proved the complete opposite. And they have not made the Jewish community feel comfortable in the slightest. The people that support him just don't understand that.
And, when we talk about the Jewish community in the UK too, just like in the US, there's a rise of anti-Semitism in the UK and in Europe as a whole. And there's actually been a significant rise in physical, violent attacks of anti-Semitism. I know also that you yourself, you have a smoked salmon factory that your family has owned for decades. And there was one day a 30-foot swastika spray painted on the building. What does this mean, in the full context in the rise of anti-Semitism in the UK, and the fears from the Jewish community coming from all of these attacks?
Well, look, anti-Semitism comes from various, it comes from different directions. It comes from the right, it comes from the left. You have Islamism as well, sort of stirring up anti-Semitism. We've seen, a bit of that in Europe too. To be honest, one of the reasons, and there's an irony here, but one of the reasons why I have always been a Brexiter for many years, where actually I would say the majority, and this is only an estimate because I don't believe there is a poll, but I would say that the majority of the Jewish community in the UK, certainly in London, were probably on the Remain side of the argument, and you'll often hear them say, Europe, the EU and Europe has the peace in Europe since World War II, and we can never have another thing like that happen again, and therefore we have to support the EU. And I see it from a completely different perspective, and in fact, feel the opposite is very much the case. My argument against the EU was all driven by economics. I believe that having a single currency for countries that are totally out of balance economically can never work. And the problem is that if you have to keep having Germany bailing out the poorer countries more efficient, you start building a dysfunctional regime where you have, recipients and donors, and then the donor starts getting, building resentment that it's having to keep giving all this sort of money over to the other countries working so hard, and then it starts laying down stronger sort of rules, and then the recipient country says, hang on a second, we didn't sign up to those rules, and then you have the EU sort of implanting prime ministers. They've done it in Italy and Greece and so on. And what this resentment does, it builds extremism. And eventually, I believe that single currency will eventually collapse. It is bound to collapse one day. No one knows when that is. But in my view, I believe that it will eventually collapse. When it does, there is going to be chaos in Europe. There's going to be economic chaos in Europe. And we all know where economic chaos leads. And we know where resentment leads. And this push by the EU for this sort of, federalist state across the EU, that is what's causing resentment, and that's breeding extremism. And when extremism breeds on the right and the left, you tend to see anti-Semitism grow at the same time. And that is my analysis. And I've believed for many years now that the only way to solve this problem is you have to end the EU project, because the people that run the EU, they want this federal state of Europe. They want Europe to be like the USA. They want it to be the United States of Europe, where it's essentially one big country, which can never work because you have totally different cultures and different, histories and so on. And the people of Europe don't want it. And so if you can't get them to change the way the leadership is operating it, you have to sort of pull down the system. And to me, Brexit was the peaceful way of doing that. Britain leaves, it demonstrates to the other members of the EU that actually your economy can thrive without being part of this superstate. And others then look at what Britain's doing and say, hey, they're doing rather well. Maybe we don't need to be in the EU either. So that was my analysis of Europe. But coming back to the anti-Semitism question, my fear of anti-Semitism, my father was a Holocaust survivor. He's still alive today. And my fear of anti-Semitism has been, has led me down that road, which is, a different view to many of my friends and colleagues. But that is my view. And I'm very fearful of extremism, both on the right and the left.
I think it comes from your personal experience too. I mean, you experience this with your store, and you talk about the history of your father. And we're moving further away from history. So when people like Jeremy Corbyn are put back in some form of power, maybe a lesser form of power, he's not going to be whipped, like you said. But what does this mean for future generations who are, one, not learning about the Holocaust and are forgetting about it? I've seen this here in America. I mean, they don't know any of the basic numbers. They don't know about how widespread the hate was, how it controlled people's lives, how narratives controlled people. What do you think this means for future generations?
Well, you're absolutely right. And education is so key. It is so important, not just for Jewish families to educate their kids, but for the whole world to be educated, so history doesn't repeat itself. There was absolutely disgusting report you may have seen on CNN a couple of days ago by Christiane Amanpour, where she started off by saying that today is the 82nd anniversary of Kristallnacht, which was the start of the genocide, which led to the Holocaust, and it was about losing any sense of truth and so on. And then she completely segged to Trump and basically sort of said, and this is what we have in America today. And I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was one of the most disgusting pieces of journalism I've seen on mainstream media, I think, perhaps ever. Basically, what she was saying is that America today was like 1938 Germany. Now, what sort of message, apart from the insult to all the families of people that suffered in the Holocaust, what message does that send to people, to young people in America today who, life's not easy, COVID's quite difficult, but people aren't being killed on the streets. They're not lining people up and sending them to concentration camps and putting them into gas chambers. So any young person in America that doesn't know about the Holocaust will be thinking, well, if this is what the Holocaust was like, it wasn't that bad, was it? So why is everyone making a fuss about it? It was disgusting, absolutely disgusting by CNN. And I tweeted something along the lines of, if that's in that comparison, actually you're acting like Joseph Goebbels, who was the big sort of Hitler's propagandist, because that's what they're doing. This is a propaganda war. And, we're not going to educate ourselves through the media. We're certainly not educating ourselves through social media. This has to be done, in the schools, in the colleges. And sadly, there's a very left-leaning bias there too. So I don't know what the answer is, but it's got to start from the top, and and we have to, education is what it's all about.
How exactly can the Labour Party move forward here and prove themselves after this egregious report came out?
I think they've got, they're not going to be able to sort out, getting support from the public until they've sorted themselves out. They have an internal battle at the moment. That, when Corbyn was running it, he allowed people to join the party. There was a very small fee, and thousands of people joined the party, and he had this big following. It was led by a group called Momentum, and all of these people come from that very same sort of perspective. That sort of hard left, socialist, very anti-Israel, and most likely anti-Semitic background too. Not in every case, but there is a very close alliance between anti-Zionists and anti-Semites, and until Labour has never won an election when they've been extreme. The only time it was Tony Blair brought the Labour Party back into the centre, and that's when Labour found power in the UK. But they've never, British people, I think, are generally they're quite centrist, and they're quite tolerant. They've got a pretty good sense of humour as well, and they don't like extreme. We're not an extremist sort of country. We've never experienced fascism in the UK, where they have, in mainstream, in mainland Europe, both in Germany and Italy and Spain with Franco and so on, and much across Europe. So Britain's always been much more stable, and yeah, the demography of Britain is changing to some extent, but I still think we still have that sort of innate sense of balance in the UK, and long may that continue.